The future work is now, but as we look forward into the future, what are you most excited about?
To me personally, I think this is probably a once in a generation opportunity, not just as HR practitioners, but maybe even as a society to shape and to co-shape also the way how we will live and work. And that's simply exciting. And to be honest with you, for those of us who are a little bit closer to the capital markets, if there were, for example, future of work shares available at the stock market, I would certainly recommend to buy them.
Yeah, we should figure that out. Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. In today's episode, I'm joined by Christian Schmeichel, who's a Senior Vice President and Chief Future of Work Officer at SAP. During the podcast, Christian shares SAP's holistic future of work agenda to shaping the next world of work. The agenda is SAP's North Star to reimagine work at its core. It considers business elements and strategic HR components along three dimensions to create a sustainable work experience for its global and diverse workforce. These three dimensions include the future workforce, aiming to define a target picture for a future-proof workforce at SAP. It also includes the future of people practices, making new, flexible, and healthy work for everyone. And lastly, the future of HR, reimagining how HR functions need to operate in the future along a strategic HR master plan. This is definitely an episode you don't want to miss, but before we jump in, as always, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Christian, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'm doing very well. How are you today?
I'm good. It seems like every time I speak to you, you're always in New York.
True, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, for everyone who can't see Christian, his background's always a New York City landscape whenever he tunes in, no matter where he is around the world.
That's the beauty of, for example, these virtual calls, right?
Yeah,
You can feel that you're really here a global citizen.
exactly. How have you been, first and foremost? How's work? How's family?
Thank you. Doing very well. I think these days everyone is now looking forward also to the summer break, which is something I'm certainly doing as well. I think it has been a very successful and very busy year so far. So therefore, really looking forward now to the summer season.
Mm. When we last spoke, you kind of just took on this new role of SVP and Chief Future Work Officer. But for everyone listening, could you just give them an overview? What is the role of a Chief Future of the Work Officer? How do you describe that when people ask you?
Absolutely, Chris. No, and that's a great question because to be very honest with you, if somebody had asked me 10 years ago, right, or maybe had even introduced him or herself as a chief future of work officer, I would have been scratching my head first of all. Right? And about today, as we speak, right, and now here in August 2023, it seems to be pretty straightforward because I'm not telling any secrets, right? The world around us is changing at a breakneck speed. In SAP, we took this as a strategic opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We need to manage something like the future of work as a holistic topic. We came up with a holistic future of work agenda. And to simplify, we are more or less looking at the future of workforce, right? If we close our eyes and think about our company 5 or 10 years down the road, how many permanent employees will we have? How many gig workers? How much AI will we have on the team? How many robots, right? And this target picture will help us to determine and to talk about the future of people practices, which is the second dimension which we are looking at. And these people practices, this is certainly bringing the bread and butter business of HR to the next level, make it future ready, but also new and emerging topics like flex work, mental health and well-being, and so on and so forth. And the third dimension, which we're taking care of, is then the future of the HR department itself. Because let's face it, right, with all of that stuff going on, we as HR practitioners also need to evolve as well. And this is more or less the scope of my organization. Very excited to drive this for a company like SAP for 110,000 people across the globe. And of course, we are leveraging technology, no question.
Yeah, no, I love that. Let's dive into those more details because when we last spoke, I remember you saying that you believe that the future of work goes beyond creating a new where of work, which is really where many people are focusing on. And you mentioned the three strategic dimensions that you follow around the future of work. The first one being the future of workforce. So let's jump in there first. How do you break that down?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes here now to the future of work, this is a broad term, right? And when we take a look back, it's clear that the whole topic has received a huge attention. and also some acceleration during the pandemic. I mean, let's face it, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, all employers were kind of checking, do you need to send people home to keep them safe? This is also what we did. We more or less sent our folks to remote working setup within 48 hours. And this has been working well. But this was not future of work yet. This was crisis management. This was kind of an emergency, right? We had to take off. And a lot of folks then focus, certainly like us, also on making sure that we have a solid and an attractive flex work policy in place. So this was our initial focus, right? But then we realized, yes, I mean, where the fun part starts is certainly if you have flex work in place and you can take a look at all the other dimensions. And this is what we see also as future of work. The true future of work is more or less what is starting now. Since the pandemic is over, we can now think about these other strategic topics, like, for example, the future of workforce.
When you think of flex work, it means something different in every company. What does flex work mean at SAP?
Yes, that's a great question. And we, of course, have been already offering quite a lot of flexibility even before the pandemic. But the pandemic forced us and encouraged us to think about this topic in a much more strategic way, because if you take a look at studies, right, we all see this. I mean, in particular, also the new generations entering the workforce, they're looking for much more than simply a good salary and also career opportunities. They also would like to have a great working environment, including flex work. So when we had that strategic discussion at SAP, what does flex work mean for us? We looked at more or less all the options that flex work offers, right, on that flex work continuum. We have on one end more or less something which is completely free floating. Everyone is more or less doing what he or she wants. It's kind of, some may call it anarchy, others may call it paradise. I don't want to judge that. I think it's more or less one option. This is something we said for SAP, this doesn't really work. On the other end of the spectrum, you would theoretically have something which is very tightly managed, where everyone is checking in and clocking in.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. If your business model requires that, if you have a lot of compliance going on, that's perfectly fine. But for SAP, this was also not the right option. We were kind of landing in the middle, which we call empowerment along business requirements. And this is where we say we have a pledge to flex, where we ask our folks to check with their managers, right, what kind of hybrid working model works best for them. In practice, this means that people are more or less in the office 2 or 3 days a week, because this is what works best, because we still see a lot of value of getting together. Nevertheless, this is something which is then checked individually, because all teams are different. In the sales arena, I would probably expect people to be rather with the customer than in the office. Versus in software development, yes, of course, people are getting together on a regular basis, also to code software and so on and so forth.
So you're really empowering employees and line managers to make that decision together.
Absolutely. And I think this is what is also part of our corporate DNA, flexibility, but also trust and empowerment. This is key to make sure that people can run at their personal best. At the same time, they need to be guardrails. And as I said, right, I mean, we're in the business of making business. Therefore, it's important that we also have a good level of productivity. And here we feel that this hybrid working model, with being in the office 2 or 3 days per week, and then, for example, having the rest really then a more or less focus time at home or wherever, this is something that seems to work best for us.
What are some of the other considerations that shape the future workforce?
I mean, when it comes really to the future of workforce at SAP, it's clear that the world around us is changing at a breakneck speed, as I've already mentioned. And if you close your eyes and you think 5 or 10 years down the road, how our business will evolve, it's clear that also our workforce composition presumably will evolve. So as we speak, we're of course looking how many permanent employees do we have, how many gig workers, and now also with the latest developments in the AI space, it's clear that we will presumably have in the future also some robots on the team, and maybe also some artificial intelligence, that's for sure. So our workforce in the future will not only be simply human, that's clear. It's going to be a human/machine workforce. And therefore, I mean, so far we have been growing a lot at SAP, and we will certainly do so. But of course, the composition, and also with the help of technology, this will certainly change, like for all other companies as well.
This all sounds very exciting, but there are, I'm sure, challenges in doing so. What have you faced as your biggest challenges as you move towards a future workforce?
Probably a lot of other companies as well. If you try to plan something like this, and nobody's having a crystal ball, so we need to do scenario planning. The good news is in the year 2023, we have a lot of data at our fingertips, right, which a lot of companies, including ourselves, probably didn't have maybe 10 years ago. So there's a completely different level of quality available that we can leverage in terms of planning scenarios, what's going to happen, and also what works best, right? What kind of skills do we need in a couple of years? What kind of locations may work best? Now, also with all these geopolitical changes, it's important to understand maybe the world order will also change over time. And this means that, you need to get your heads around, hey, what do you want to do? Where do you think you can work best? And to bring this to kind of a fact-based level, that's certainly one challenge. I think it's doable. It's a lot of effort, but it's doable. And then at the end of the day, you need to make decisions. And this means that, this is also something that is very, very important to do this now, because the train is running very fast. And if you want to jump on that train, you got to be also fast as well.
Not everyone obviously has as lucky as yourselves to have a chief future or work officer. What advice would you give to companies about how they should approach this? What advice would you give them?
The interesting piece is a future of work organization like mine, which has been now set up 2 years ago, has certainly a lot of more or less proximity to HR topics, that's for sure. But it's important that the future of work is much more than people or HR topics. You're also talking about technology, you're talking about facilities, but you're also talking about numbers and also potential, more or less financial implications. And therefore, it's important when you are looking at this as a company that this is something that is a cross topic, which also needs to be managed in a cross-functional way. So close partnerships with the corporate strategy department, a close partnership with controlling, a close partnership with IT and facility is key to get your arms around something like this, because in the past, I think this topic was very often managed in silos, which is also maybe the restrictive part. And therefore, you need to make sure that you're getting together as a team. This is a team sport, and making sure that you get all the information together and then come up with good scenario planning, fact-based, and then bring it forward so that the business can make a decision.
I love that. I'm so happy that you shared that part, because that's a part I see that many companies go wrong. They don't have those relationships. They do work in silos, and it just doesn't move the needle as well. Who do you report into, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm reporting to our Chief People and Operating Officer. So this is a function which is combining people topics, IT, the internal process of SAP, which is our board member for more or less all of our transformational topics. And this is great because then you're working in lockstep, right, with your colleagues on the people or HR side, but at the same token, you're also having your peers as the CIO, Chief Information Officer, and so on. And I think that's a very powerful combination.
Love that. The second strategic dimension is the future of people practices.
It's interesting. All of us as HR practitioners have been in the past always focusing on a solid and business-focused people agenda. I think that's still very important. Nevertheless, we feel that this needs to be much more future-oriented. And therefore, we feel our people agenda needs to, on one hand, evolve our bread and butter business of HR, right? How do we recruit? How do we train? How do we reward? According to this future workforce. Because if you have now more gig workers than in the past, you will have a different recruiting process. If you have, for example, a different workforce composition on the permanent workforce side, you also need to have a different training concept, and so on and so forth. So all of this determines, right, the target picture on the workforce determines the future of your people practices. And this means evolving your more or less traditional HR functions to be ready for all of that. At the same time, we see that there is a lot of appetite and interest for new and emerging topics. So that's exciting times in HR, right? Because new topics are coming up. Flex work is just one discipline. New ways of working is the second one, right? How do you shape new organizational models? How do you come up with co-leadership and so on and so forth? This needs to be also structured in terms of an organizational development function that can drive these things in the year 2025 and not more or less looking at traditional methods. And things like mental health and being, I think this is certainly a big one as well. The health department at SAP is also part of our future of work organization. So we have managed the pandemic, right, with vaccination, all of that. But as we speak, the focus is also shifting to be much more inclusive in terms of looking not just at the physical health, but also at the mental health. And here we feel there is a lot of anxiety in the society, of course, also in our company. And therefore, we need to take care of our people, right? We are very caring and people-oriented organization. And therefore, it's key that we do this. And just a fun fact, at SAP, we even have a mindfulness practice, so a dedicated team as part of the Future of Work organization. And I'm very proud of that because the guys are doing a fantastic job. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, if you were doing or offering something like mindfulness, I always felt that a lot of people were a little bit skeptical and were seeming or to understand this as kind of an esoteric topic and didn't really have the business connection. As we speak at SAP, we have a long waiting list for people who would like to do that. And we see a lot of appetite. Also, after the pandemic, people had the chance to self-reflect, what is their purpose in life, and would like to help and support this. And therefore, very proud to have this dedicated team now also as part of our Future of Work organization, because I think the guys are doing an awesome job to help our company, right, to offer these kind of trainings.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that was one of the silver linings of the pandemic, the emphasis we saw on well-being and the impact. In the past, it was like a nice to have, now it's really very much table stakes, and it does have a very clear impact on the business, on the bottom line. It's also good. It's also good business as well as, and you're right. Many people had the opportunity to think during the pandemic about their why, their purpose, and is this really what I want to do? And they want to work for organizations that are there to support them and and align with their why and purpose. So I love the emphasis that you put on that with the team.
Absolutely. No. And as we said, we're getting good feedback from the organization. So we are continuously listening. We have a continuously listening function also as part of Future of Work. It's called Future of Work Insights. And we feel that everything we do should be data driven. So we need to understand what our folks need, what our candidates, applicants as well look for, so that we can customize and steer everything we do according to then more or less the requirements of our employees and managers.
I love that. What are some of the other things that you're hearing from employees through that listening?
Well, I think first of all, when it comes now to what people are looking for, it's this kind of healthy and caring culture. People feel that, they would love to contribute big time also at work. At the same time, having a healthy work-life balance has become much more important during the pandemic. I think that's probably everywhere the case. What we're also seeing is that in addition to things like good and a competitive salary or compensation benefits package, in particular, also these things like flexibility and career development in terms of skill building, what is currently hot in the market. This is something people are looking for.
Yeah.
And I think as an attractive employer, one needs to take this into consideration in a very serious way, because the war for talent is certainly increasing week by week, month by month, quarter by quarter. Therefore, it's important to have this on your radar screen.
When you looked at your Future of People practices, how did you and the team decide where to start? Because I think a lot of people listening, it's quite overwhelming. So what did that look like, and where did you choose to start?
I think what we have done is our organization, Future of Work, is more or less set up in an agile way. So we have 8 agile topic clusters, from strategy to innovation to workforce planning to health. And this means that, of course, we have more or less assigned topics, but we have some leeway and we need to focus on more or less what's currently important. And we prioritize according to our HR portfolio management process. So we are trying to run HR like a business and say, hey, this is what is important for the business. This is what we have as capacity. Let's prioritize. And then you simply have a stack ranking, and then you start at the top.
Amazing. I love that. And especially in this environment that we live in, you have to have an agile approach. Gone are the days of having a 5-year plan of where no one can predict that even 2 years ahead of where we are now. So I love the fact that you and the team are working in agile methodology, and in order to have that speed of execution as well, and pivot quickly when needed.
It's key to success. You're absolutely right.
Third strategic dimension, the future of HR. Such a big topic, right? You can't go online without hearing about it. Let me ask you this, a big question. What do you believe is the future of HR?
First of all, it's simply great to see once again that attention and that focus also on the HR team as a topic, right? I think a lot of colleagues and friends and practitioners in the HR space have simply done an awesome job also during the pandemic to keep people safe, make sure that we have been successfully going through. And this is great. So we certainly have a seat now at the table. That's a great starting point. Nevertheless, we are just entering a new chapter, if you will, right? Also as people functions. And therefore, it's super important to have a clear North Star. And this is usually, I mean, the business, right? In your business strategy, that is the starting point. And I feel that as HR practitioners, we need to evolve now our complete setup. And this means, having, for example, a new people agenda, which is much more future oriented. It also means that we need to evolve our HR operating model. Now, with ChatGPT entering the game, it's very clear that our more or less traditional also transactional activities over time will be supported by AI. And this means we will have the opportunity to more or less free up some resources there over time, not tomorrow, but over time. And this will allow us to invest once again into the value activities much more, whether it's employer branding, recruiting, learning, what have you. And that's going to be great. And this means presumably two things in general. Number one, we need to leverage technology big time. And I'm not saying this because I'm working for a tech company. I think there are other tech companies out there, but it's clear, right? I mean, that's going to be the game changers. If we don't go for a digital first approach, we won't have the capacity to drive all of that other stuff. That's clear. But in addition to the great technology backbone and to leverage that, we also need to evolve as a function on the skill side. I'm a strong believer that we have a great starting point right now as HR practitioners, but we need to evolve our function along various key dimensions. Number one, data-driven HR, right? I think working with facts and figures versus simply anecdotal feedback from the business is probably a must-have. And that's something which needs to be established. I think historically as HR, at least this is the stereotype. In some functions, we have been very strong on the data side, be it payroll or total rewards. In other functions, maybe sometimes not so strong. Therefore, we need to evolve this. At SAP, we have come up with a small team, which is called HR University or HR Learning Team, where you train this stuff, right, with kind of very basic training courses for HR practitioners, coming up with where to find the data, how to analyze the data, how to visualize the data, or how to tell the story around the data. These are very basic things, but that can have a huge impact. Digital HR is for me a second big skill arena. Digital HR doesn't mean that as HR practitioners we should be able to code software, but it's about leveraging the systems, right? To the ultimate extent. And also, for example, agile HR, knowing how to drive things in an agile way, having an agile mindset, being aware of the agile methodologies is key to success. And I also feel that experience management for HR, so understanding what the business needs from a consumer standpoint of HR services is probably key. And there are tips and tricks and methodologies. I've been the head of HR for SAP in Japan a couple of years ago. And if you go, for example, to a country like Japan, you see what customer service orientation means and understanding to look at the topic from a consumer standpoint. These things can be leveraged, right, to make sure you have great people experiences based on what the customer and the consumer needs. And these are skills we need to evolve as a function. This is not happening overnight, but if we get this, I think we can do great talent management, offer great leadership trainings, and do great offerings on the total reward side based on these new skills, based on this new understanding what the business needs.
From everything that you mentioned, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for HR leaders as we move forward?
To do all of that in a meaningful way, because it's so much. So therefore, one needs to prioritize and need to start somewhere. I think everyone will probably agree that the topics I'm outlining are important and nice.
Yes,
and
exactly.
But you need to get it done, right? And therefore, you need to start somewhere. And this will certainly depend on the starting point of the organization. It will depend on the budget that one is having, but also business requirements. But one needs to start somewhere.
I think one of the challenges I'm hearing, I'm not sure if you've heard the same thing in your network, is there's many HR leaders that I speak to that are struggling to maintain the momentum that we got from the pandemic. There was huge momentum that was gained over the last 2 years. And I'm seeing now that HR leaders are really struggling to maintain that momentum.
Yeah, I think this is something we are also seeing here in our networks, I think very often. And this is something where I feel we need to make sure that we understand the future of work is much more than flex work, because the flex work piece was something which has carried us through the pandemic and is now a key topic, which is now hopefully kind of a continuous improvement mode for many organizations already. But now we need to make that next step. And the next step for future of work and also for the future of HR is tech-based, so AI, right? Entering now the playing field. This is certainly currently kind of overhyped, but over the midterm, probably still underestimated what will happen there. And therefore, we got to get our arms around this. And as HR practitioners, get ready for that on the skill side, on the tech side. With that, I think we can still gain or keep that momentum or even further accelerate.
Yeah. On that point, then, how are you deploying? Obviously, you're a technology company, but how are you deploying state-of-the-art technology in a digital-first way to scale efficiency across those work experiences that you've just been describing?
What I feel is important that one needs to understand, right, how to manage your data and your technology backbone in the first place. I think this is where you need to start to have that foundation. And then, of course, yeah, we are deploying now. Please bear with me. Of course, SAP runs SAP, so we are running our own. But I think independent from the software that you're using, it's important to have that kind of digital first approach. Not all services can be more or less provided to the business in a manual way anymore, nor should they. And therefore, it's important to have a clear strategy what kind of services are provided via either self-services or, for example, via kind of technology-based or augmented models. And then what is then more or less remaining, which should be done also by real humans at this point to make sure that it's a perfect mix, right? I mean, HR is still about the human touch, but the human touch needs to be provided with scale, also based on technology. But this doesn't mean that everything needs to be provided by human. On one hand, what you're seeing here, you can do now a lot of also even human factored elements remotely, right? With Zoom or Teams or whatever the software is that you're using. That's a big one. At the same time, I feel that the better we standardize in the back end, the more we can personalize in the front end. Because with the help of technology, you can really see what somebody needs, right? If somebody is, I don't know, a persona X and he or she would like to consume some training courses, and if you know what other personas in the same more or less category have already done as training, you can come up with these training recommendations. So it's about to use the technology for a great consumer experience that people are happy and are taken care of. And what is then more or less left or remaining, this is something where HR with the more or less strategic HR business partners or HR advisors or whatever you want to call them need to get into the game and then help the business in a straightforward way.
Yeah, no, I love that. What would you say are some of the main considerations that you have when either deploying technology or buying it? Because for many leaders I speak to, they're overwhelmed. You know, every day there's new technologies and platforms coming up, and it's quite tempting to run at the new shiny object that's out there as well. What are some of the questions that you ask yourself, and what are some of the considerations that you have whenever you're looking at technology?
Number one, I've already mentioned it. I mean, as somebody who is now representing SAP, of course, we are running SAP. For that reason, the choice for us is easy.
Sure.
Because this is for us a mantra. Nevertheless, I think there are, of course, always considerations, right? The first one is it's about simplification and standardization. You need to have a standardized and a simple and straightforward, more or less, platform where all the data is coming together. I think this is something you always need. And then you need to focus, right, what is now needed from a business standpoint. There might be business areas where there's a huge growth, and you need to focus more on recruiting and learning. There might be other companies and business models where you need different topics which are spot on. This is something where you need to prioritize. And for us, it has always been the case that the more integrated something is, right, the more you can go for a complete suite approach, the easier it is also for the implementation because everything by default fits together. And based on that, it's not so much about implementing any kind of IT solution. It's also about the adoption, right? It's about that the business and managers and employees and also the HR folks themselves like what they have and also use it. It's about adoption.
Yeah.
And only then you can reap the fruits of everything and can more or less free up resources that you can then reinvest elsewhere in the value add stuff. As I mentioned, in employer branding, recruiting, what have you.
That's the hard part, right? People think about the technology implementation, but it's actually the adoption and that's the hard part, right? Which is not a few months, but this is an ongoing challenge that will continuous. Yeah.
And I mean, as we speak, we are probably entering a new era, right? I mean, now here with AI, a lot of companies have already been using AI. We have been using this also in the HR space now already for some years. But in particular on the automation side, when it comes here to standardizing, for example, processes, workflows, and all of that, or taking, for example, bias out of the recruiting process because you're kind of anonymizing more or less CVs. That's something which has been already there. Now with generative AI, right, we're entering a new era. And this means that there will be a lot of opportunities also to do a lot of processes differently in a much more effective and also efficient way. And that's something that's going to be exciting. And also for us as HR, if we get it right properly, once again, a once in a generation opportunity to bring our function to a completely next level.
Yeah. What are some of the use cases you're seeing of how HR can leverage ChatGPT, OpenAI?
In general, we are talking about two dimensions. The first dimension is certainly to make any kind of processes simpler, right? In terms of driving efficiency so that you have your hands free. Whether this is in the recruiting space, that, for example, you have ChatGPT write your job descriptions. You have, for example, you can have in that whole skill arena also maybe ChatGPT or any kind of other generative AI then work on any kind of skill tagging, right? That, for example, you say, hey, now what? Which is usually a huge manual effort, but for example, matching right what people have to maybe what is available in a standardized way. And this is a huge game changer if we get that right. And I think when you do this, right, beyond driving efficiency, the second dimension is certainly experience. If something is much easier than before, it's of course a great opportunity to also make working on HR topics much more fun. And much more modern, right? Also much more state of the art. And that's certainly a game changer as well, also on the experience side for HR practitioners themselves, but also for applicants, candidates, managers, employees who are working with HR.
I think we spoke a lot about technology, but I don't want to miss the fact that it's also really important for HR to retain the human factor. So talk about how you think about that.
In a very traditional way, HR, right? The H in HR is certainly key. This is what makes our function strong. And therefore, we need to always find ways with all the leverage of technology, how we can also, more or less retain that connection to the business, understanding what's needed, and also have that personal touch wherever it's meaningful, right? If I only need information, the self-service is much more effective. I don't need to have a human touch to simply get, for example, a document or maybe a short piece or small piece of information. But when it comes to consulting, also personal topics, it's so important that we as HR practitioners keep also that connection and that platform for the business open to be in regular interaction. And what I've always been seeing is we need to come up with creative models how to pool our resources to provide that service. So at SAP, a couple of years back, we introduced something which we call HR advisor model. This means that for our first line and middle managers, we offer not an HR business partner service anymore, but we have rather pooled our resources in a regional setup because of the time zone effectiveness. And then, first and mid-level managers can approach these folks if they have a topic. And because usually first and mid-level managers have a different set of questions or inquiries or topics than senior managers, it's much more effective and people are much happier with that setup than having a one-to-one relationship with an HR business partner.
Yeah.
But it's not just more effective, it's also even more scalable for us. So I think we need to think about these traditional boundaries and come up with these elements that still provide a human touch, but at scale, because we have all limited budgets, so we need to be creative.
No, I absolutely love that. Before I let you go, as you continue to think about the future of work, the future of work is now, but as we look forward into the future, what are you most excited about as we look forward?
To me personally, I think this is probably a once in a generation opportunity, not just as HR practitioners, but maybe even as a society, to shape and to co-shape also the way how we will live and work. And that's simply exciting. And to be honest with you, for those of us who are a little bit closer to the capital markets, if there were, for example, future of work shares available at the stock market, I would certainly recommend to buy them.
Yeah, we should figure that out. Before I let you go, where can people connect with you? If they want to reach out to you personally and say hi, where's the best place?
The easiest way is to simply connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm quite approachable there. I'm happy to be in touch. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, Christian, it's a pleasure as always chatting to you. I love your energy, passion for the work that you do. It obviously clearly comes across, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for having me. All the best.
Thanks.